in police room 619. Oh, because, 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 oh, because, because,
The rugby movement, I recall as being
When I
maybe
read that
one
there
of my
was going to be a
biggest and
protest
first
march, I decided that would be something I would like to go
This
to.
was-
attended to.
This
And
is
my daughter
1981,
Meg at the
so
time was
1981.
13 years
So
old.
you were
So
how old?
I'm
My daughter
13
Meg
years
being a
old,
mother.
and my mother
so,
asked me
we
if
decided to
I
go to
wanted
the
to join
protest
her,
march.
and it was
And my
this
memory
very
of it
impressionable
is
night.
that it was
And when we
pouring
got to
rain,
the stadium,
and we marched a long
where
ways,
the event
probably
was,
2 miles
I
from
recall
downtown Albany
we
to
all
where
had
the
to
stadium was
cross
where they
arms
played
and
the game.
link like a human
somebody
chain
made the
to
comment
prevent
that
people
raining
from
is
going
okay.
into the event. And as a 13-year-old, that's extremely impressionable and powerful, and I believe that it gave me a lot to think about as a kid and moving forward.
The reason I got involved is I was working in an alternative high school in Albany, New York, where my students were probably 95% black students. And I wanted to get involved in some organization that was helping to do away with racism in the United States in different areas. And I joined the local NAACP, and they weren't doing a whole lot. And then I read that this group that did the march against the rugby team was going to hold a meeting, and they also had heard that the Ku Klux Klan was coming to Albany. So I thought, well, let me go and find out about this group, and I'll go to the anti-Klan thing and see how involved I can get with that particular group. So I did, and that was in 1982. The protest was in, I think it was September 81, and by, I think it was February 82 was that first meeting, and I was involved with it ever from that time on until apartheid in South Africa ended. Well, it was not particularly supportive of the anti-apartheid movement, and in some regards it was really totally opposed to it. Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States during that period of time. But from the time of the Vietnam War, when this country was afraid that Southeast Asia was going to fall to communism, up until the period that I was working in the 80s, there was always a fear that these emerging countries, developing countries, what they used to call third world countries, would line with the Soviet Union more than line with us. But the anti-apartheid movement was saying we shouldn't be supporting the white South Africans. We should be supporting these people. Now, we shouldn't be supporting the Soviet Union, but we should be supporting these people in their struggle. And that they were being supported in the struggle by the Soviet Union. We weren't working with the Soviet Union, but we were often accused of being left and communist and, we were accused of being. And so our local group was infiltrated by the FBI. There was an informant in our group. We never knew who the informant was, in Albany. And we got papers of them coming to meetings, and then all stuff was blacked out. We never knew who the informant was. So there was all kinds of stuff going on. Who knows?
Communist.
Communist. And I did have a suspicion over the years who the informant was, somebody who was a member of our group for a really long time, but I had no proof of this. But he would almost always bring a briefcase to the meetings, and he would put the briefcase on the floor. And he was an excellent member of the group, and he was a speaker for the group and all sorts of things, but I still always had a feeling there might have been something there. And I entertained the idea of spilling a glass of water on his briefcase, but of course I never followed through with that.
And the eyes of the world are watching now.
In 1992, I went on a trip to southern Africa where I went to Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa. And at the time, the reason I got to go there was a man from Chicago named Prexy Nesbitt, and he knew lots of people in southern Africa. We went to Mozambique, and that was probably the most memorable one-time experience of the whole wonderful 12 or 13 years that I was doing this work, because he knew people in Mozambique. One of the things we did is we went to visit Graça Machel. Graça Machel was the widow of Samora Machel, who'd been the president of Mozambique, and his plane had been shot down, they figure, by the white South African government, because they didn't want Mozambique to become a free and independent country on their border. And Graça Machel, so she was the widow of Samora Machel. She was living in sort of a government housing on the Indian Ocean, and Samora Machel knew Prexy Nesbitt. Graça Machel knew Prexy Nesbitt. So Graça invited us for tea. So Vera and myself and Prexy went to her house for tea. Now, what's interesting about this is Graça Machel, who was a widow at the time, later became the second wife of Nelson Mandela. And after Nelson Mandela got out of jail and he and his wife Winnie split up, Graça Machel moved to South Africa and was married to Nelson. When she was in Mozambique, she was working to repatriate boy soldiers. You hear about these boy soldiers today in lots of countries who are kidnapped by Boko Haram or different groups. The white government of South Africa was working in Mozambique, kidnapping boys in villages to fight against the liberation struggle in Mozambique. And we got to go with Prexy. There was a Methodist minister there who was teaching young Mozambicans to become ministers, and they had a guest house. We went to the guest house, and they brought in 5 boys who were in age from maybe 8 to 15. They were ragged, they were barefoot, dirty, they were wearing army fatigues, and they told us what had happened to them. And all of them said they had killed people. The one boy said, and this is what Graça had told us, that these kids couldn't go home again because the villages they'd been taken from, they'd seen their mothers raped, the huts were burned down, and so the villages were afraid if these boys came back, that would happen to them again. So the boys were sort of just left out there. They were terrified. And one question I had, the oldest boy was pretty cool. He had like a not silver, but like a metal bracelet on, and he's the only one who had shoes. And I said to him, "Weren't you ever afraid?" And he said, "No, I was never afraid, because these white people who came, they would cut a line in our leg with a razor blade, and they would put powder in it, and then that meant nobody could kill us because we became invincible due to this powder." And that was just a horrifying story. Another little boy said he wanted to go home, and his mother said he couldn't go home. She didn't want him to come back. So that trip to Mozambique was really one of the most, life-changing, enlightening trips. I also went as a representative. I was a teacher. I'm a retired teacher, and I had a letter from the New York State United Teachers introducing me to the union leaders in Mozambique. And we went to a school, and the school had 800 students, 8 teachers, and they taught underneath the trees, and the kids sat on the ground. The building had been bombed out. And one of the things I did, you can't promise to do very much, but we said we would try to get them movable blackboards. And when I came back, in my school, we raised $2,000, and I sent it to one of the Methodist ministers, to buy blackboards for this particular school. After going to Namibia, I knew about Namibia. It had been called Southwest Africa until it got its independence from South Africa, and then they changed their name, and they made English their official language, so they were looking for teachers. And I applied for a Fulbright teacher exchange program in Namibia, and I got it. So in '96, I actually got to go and teach school in Namibia. This poster, which was up in my attic with about a gazillion other things, and I had almost forgotten about it, was a poster that we used for a lobby day at the New York State Legislature. This, to me, is one of the most, I don't know, memorable names to have on there. It was a wonderful thing. This is Ossie Davis, who was a famous actor. He and his wife, Ruby Dee, had been really involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and he died a few years ago, but he was a wonderful person who gave of his time and his money to the anti-apartheid movement. That's Ossie Davis. This is your mother's name, because I must have dragged your mother down there that particular day. That's her maiden name, Meg Corolla. And there's a name.
And that was your group, the...
This was the Capital District Coalition Against Apartheid in Britain.